Next, we're going to be looking at the properties palette, which is over here on the left-hand side. As well, we'll be looking at the project browser. If neither of those two are open at the moment, it's not a problem. If you go to our View tab at the top, at the very end, there's the user interface. So we can click on that, and in there you'll see our project browser and our properties. So just make sure that they're both turned on. These two palettes are something that you're going to be using day in, day out, so you'll always have them turned on. So the properties palette will display the properties of either the current view if nothing is selected. It will also take on the properties of any element that you have selected. So for example, I'm going to draw a wall in the drawing space. Now, as the wall has been drawn, if I select it, you'll notice the properties palette is now displaying the properties of that wall. The first thing here you'll see is called the type selector. If we hit the arrow there, it now displays the various types of walls that we can choose from. These walls will be loaded into your project by default. So we're able to select one from that library. That is using the type selector. Below that, we're able to select the edit type, and what that will do is we can edit the wall type itself. Below the edit type, we have a few different headings. We have our constraints heading, our structural heading, dimensions, and identity data, as well as the phasing. So in the property section is where we can edit whatever component we have selected. As we progress in the course, we will go into a lot more detail about what each individual heading does. So if I hit double escape, I deselect that wall, you'll notice that the properties palette now displays the properties of the view that I'm currently in. So you can see that the properties palette has now changed its headings and so on. And it's now displaying the properties of the current view. Select the wall, I'm going to delete it. Next is the project browser. The project browser just contains all the various views, the schedules, sheets, and groups of the current project. What we're going to focus mainly on for the next while will be our floor plans, and you can see here we're currently on level 0. Next, we have the status bar, which is down in the bottom left-hand corner where it currently says ready. If you're familiar with AutoCAD, this is almost like the command line. All it will do is just display information about how to use that tool. It will also give us some tips and hints on what the next step will be. So to give you an example, if I choose my wall tool, it's asking me to click to enter wall start point. So I'll click. It's now telling me to enter the wall end point. And it also is telling me that space bar flips the orientation. So if you're ever unsure of what your next step is, just refer then to the status bar. Next is the view controls, which is down here in the left-hand corner. The first thing there in our view controls is the scale. With Revit, when we're creating our view, so currently we're on a level 0 if we refer over to our project browser. So we apply the scale to this actual view. Again, if you're familiar with AutoCAD, so in your model space, you'll have a scale of 1:1, and then in your paper space, that's where you'll create your viewports and then scale on your sheet. So with Revit, what you do is you apply all of your visualizations and scalings, etc., to that specific view. So it's currently set to 1:100. If you select it, you'll see our list, our typical list of scales. If what you want isn't there, again, just selecting custom, we can create a new scale. Next is the detail level. For this, I'm going to place a small wall. With the detail level, we have 3 options. We have coarse, medium, and fine. That is referring to the level of detail currently associated with that wall. So right now we're able to see brick, cavity block, and plasterboard. we can adjust that level of detail if we want to display nothing. So if I change over to coarse, we'll just get a grayed out hatch. We have our medium and fine. Medium and fine would generally have the same detail finish, but if we were to display, for example, a door or a window which would have more detail than a wall, then again you'd see the variances between the medium and fine. So the purpose of that, if I go back to our course level, if we were doing just typical sale plans or planning drawing, we don't want to show the full detail level of the current wall, so we'll just use the course. Next is the visual style. For this, I'm going to go into my 3D view. If you want to follow along, we'll go up to the quick access toolbar at the top, and there's the 3D view. We'll select that, and there's the 3D view of my wall. So our next option, the visual style. There we have our wireframe, hidden line, shaded, consistent colors, and realistic. That is referring to the visual style of this wall. So if I revert that back to wireframe, you'll see it becomes a transparent wall. We have our hidden line where it's no longer transparent. Shaded will introduce colors. We have a consistent color with no shading. And we have a realistic, which shows a realistic image of the brickwork. Now, obviously, the wireframe is going to use up a lot less of the CPU usage than the realistic mode. So for general modeling, it's always best to either use wireframe or hidden line. If you're to model in realistic all the time, your computer is going to be very slow and there's a possibility of the software crashing. So wall modeling will stick with the hidden line. Next, we have the sun. So we're able to display the sun in the project. We're able to put it to a specific location. This is something we will, of course, cover in this course. Once you have set up your sun, you can then turn on your shadows. So we can also have that shadows cast by changing the sun settings. Then we have our quick access to render our image. Then we have quick access here to show our crop, make our crop visible. If we're happy with our 3D view, we can actually lock this view in position and then use that for print or putting into a sheet later on. Next, we have the glasses symbol, and that is a temporary hide or isolate. So if we wanted to temporarily hide an object or to isolate the object to solely work on that, we would use the glasses. The small light bulb beside it is how we can then reveal what's hidden in the drawing. And the remaining views we're not going to cover in this course. Then over on the bottom right-hand corner, we have what are called selection toggles. I'm going to go back to level 0 in my project browser. So let's double click on level 0 to go back. So to go over these selection toggles, the first one there is a select links. So when we link in a drawing or CAD file and so on, we can use this to select them. If we have created an underlay and we wanted to then select it, we'll use the select underlay. If we have pinned any elements in the drawing, this is where we can then select them. The next one is called select element by face. This is basically where we're able to select an element by its face. So if we had a floor slab, we can click on the actual face of the floor slab instead of clicking on the edge of the floor slab. There we have dragged elements on selection. What this does, it allows you to drag an element without selecting it. So you just have to click and hold and you can drag it. If it's turned off, you have to click it to select it and then you can drag it. The next displays the background processes. So if anything is happening in the background, it will be displayed here. And next is the selection filter. With the selection filter, we're able to highlight multiple elements and we can then filter out things that we don't want to be included in that selection. We also have the context menu. We access that by right-clicking. When we right-click, it will open up the context menu, and that will just display some various options. It also depends on what's currently selected. So if I select the wall and then right-click, you'll notice I get a different variation of options. The main area here is known as the drawing area. This is where we're going to create our model. In order to navigate this model, we use our pan and zoom. To pan the drawing, which means us basically grabbing it and moving it left to right, we'll click and hold in the wheel. Once we click and hold in the wheel, you'll see the pan symbol. You then move the mouse left to right, up and down, and we're able to pan the view. To zoom, we'll just scroll the wheel in and out, in and out. If we zoom out too far, just double click on the wheel and that will zoom extend. So everything will be centralized. If we go over to our 3D view, so open the quick access, we'll select the default 3D view. To navigate a 3D view, it's the same. We'll click and hold in the wheel. As well, we can scroll the wheel to zoom in and out. In order to orbit the view, we need to hold in Shift, hold in the scroll wheel, and then we can move the cursor to orbit around an object. To make the object centralized when we orbit, if we select it and then orbit. In the top right, we have the view cube, which is another way that we can navigate the view. So we can either click and select the view cube itself. We can also rotate the view as well. I'll go back now to my level 0. And I will just create a couple of additional walls. So we have two selection methods. We have our window selection and a crossing selection. A window selection, if you start from the top left, click and hold in the mouse. And if I drag my cursor over, we've just created our window selection. So you can see it's a solid gray line. So if I wanted to select this wall, the wall only becomes selected once it's entirely inside my selection window. Same with the other walls. You can see that they don't become highlighted in blue until they're entirely inside the window. And press Escape to deselect. Second selection method is called a crossing selection. So get into the bottom right-hand corner, moving up to the top left. The difference between the two is the object just needs to touch the crossing window to become selected. So the window selection, the object must be entirely inside the window. And the crossing selection, the object only needs to touch off the crossing selection. Next, we have what's known as the contextual tab. The contextual tab will only appear when you select a tool. So as an example, if I select my wall tool, we'll notice we're on the architectural tab. We have the architectural ribbon. So when I select my wall tool, you'll notice that the tab will change. We are now on what is known as the green contextual tab. So it says modify-place wall. So every time we select a certain tool or component, the actions which we can carry out with that tool will be displayed. So when we're creating a wall, we're shown the draw panel, which shows various methods which we can draw a wall, as well as the contextual tab and the contextual panel. We'll also get an options bar. So again, this options bar is specific to the wall. And if we were to change the tool, the options would vary for that tool. So I've double escape to finish. If I then select door, contextual tab will appear. The two panels in which I can use for that door only appear, as well as the options bar for that door. We're now going to look at the wall tool. The wall tool is located in the architecture tab within the build panel. First one is our wall tool. So the wall tool will create a non-structural element in our model. We'll click once to open up the tool. And here you see our green contextual tab appears with our draw panel, our options for that wall tool, as well the modification section is open. The first thing we're going to look at is the draw panel. The draw panel will display our options and how in which we can draw our wall itself. With the option of drawing by a line, a rectangle, we have our inscribed polygon, our circumscribed polygon, our circle, start end radius arc, center end arc, tangent end arc, fillet arc, pick lines, and pick faces. So depending on how you want to draw your wall, this is where you would then choose that option. To draw by line, I know it's selected as it's highlighted in blue. When I come into the drawing area to get my wall started, if we refer then to the status bar, it's telling me to click to enter wall start point. To get started, I'll simply left click once with the mouse. That will enter my start point from my wall. I'll then move my cursor in the direction which I want to draw my wall. I can also add an angle by moving my cursor still. To specify the finish point, again, I'll just left click with the mouse. So to specify a length when I'm creating a wall, when I start my wall and move the cursor in the direction in which I want my wall to be created, you'll notice that there is a blue dimension. This is known as a temporary dimension. So as I increase the length of the wall, you'll see that the dimension as well increases. So right now it is increasing in increments of 100. If I zoom in, those increments decrease down to 20. Again, if I zoom in more, those increments are now going up in 5s. So that is one method of specifying a distance. We can also move the wall in the direction which we want to create it, and then manually type in my distance on the keyboard of 3000 and pressing enter. So there we have the length of that wall is 3000. So that is a second option of how we can specify the length of a wall. The third option, which is what Revit is based around, the first thing we'll do is just place the wall, and then afterwards we'll come back and revise it. So we will place the wall, then we'll come back, select it, then using the temporary dimensions, that's where we will then revise that distance and change its length. As well, if we wanted to add in an angle, we'll just specify our start point, add an angle again, roughly with the dimensions which we want. And then once it's placed, we'll come back, select the wall. Here we can change the distance. And there we can change our angle. So this is the basics of how we're going to model our project. The next method of which we can draw a wall is by rectangle. To start our rectangle, we'll click once on the screen, moving the cursor away in the opposite direction, and clicking again, and double escape. So as we have done before, the best method is to place the wall first, and then we'll come back and revise those dimensions. So we'll select one side, our temporary dimension appears, and we can adjust the length. Again, selecting the top, we can then adjust the width. This is the best method for modeling with Revit. The next drawing method is the inscribed polygon. So first we will specify our start point, which essentially is the center of our polygon, moving the cursor in the direction we want to go, then specifying our radius. So I've just moved my cursor in the correct direction as well, moving up in the increments to arrive at 3000. And then I'll click to place, and that is now an inscribed polygon. Same method for the circumscribed. The difference between the two, if you'll see in the center of the circumscribed, there's an outline of a circle. So the circumscribed means that the polygon sits on the outer face of that circle, while the inscribed sits on the inner face of that circle. And the next drawing method is by circle. So we will click to specify the center point, click again to specify our radius, and then afterwards we can come back to adjust the radius itself. You'll also notice that it's not a complete circle, there's actually two curves joined together. So we can delete one out and have a remaining curve. Next method is the start end radius. This will be creating an arc. So we'll specify our start and end point by clicking the mouse. So we'll click once for our start point, clicking again for our end point, and then lastly we'll specify our arc or radius. The next method is the center end arc. So we'll specify the center point, then the end point, and then lastly the actual arc itself. The next method is the tangent end arc. So this creates an arc at the end of a line. Next is the fillet arc. This creates a round corner between two intersecting lines. Next method is pick lines. This is a very useful tool. So as an example, I'm going to draw some model lines. So in the architecture tab, there's my model line. So I'm going to draw a few lines. And then with the pick lines tool, I then simply have to select the line for the wall to then be attached to it. This is very useful when we import CAD files. We'll simply use the pick line tool to attach it to the lines, and we'll quite quickly build up our model. Lastly is pick faces. The pick faces method applies when we create a conceptual mass. We can then apply a wall to that face. When we're modeling a project, we are presented with multiple modeling aids. These aids will appear on almost all of the components which we will use. So if I draw my first wall and draw another wall above it, first thing we'll get is our temporary vertical dimension. So you'll see that there's a dashed blue line. That is telling me that that wall, when I start it, will be snapped directly above it. I can also use the temporary dimension to specify the distance before I've even started. So click once to start, move my cursor in the direction, and again I'm presented with that vertical dimension, and click. So now I know that both of those walls are started at the same point, as well have the same length. Wanted to place, if I then select one of the walls, not only am I presented with the temporary dimension to change the length, I can also change its position relative to the closest component, which is the wall below. So it's currently 2500 between each of those location lines. So I can increase that or decrease it. As well, we have the grips, which I can click and drag to extend out the length. I can also add an angle with those grips, as well as the temporary dimension. Below it, there's another dimension symbol. If selected, we'll make that temporary dimension into a permanent dimension. To then remove it, we'll select it and delete it. I deleted it using the delete key on the keyboard. So another feature is this flipping arrow. So our location line is currently set to the interior face. So I can flip it using these arrows across that location line. With the temporary dimension on the right-hand side, it has two grips as well. So this temporary dimension is currently set to the internal face. If I wanted to change the position of that temporary dimension, I will click and drag it. Once the face becomes highlighted in blue, I can then let go of the mouse for the temporary dimension to change. Again, click and drag the grip until I see the highlighted blue line, and then let go. Next, we will look into the walled option bar. In conjunction with using the drawing panel here, we must also make changes in the options bar. When we're drawing a wall, we want to constrain it to certain levels. As we're currently drawing on level 0, our base constraint for our wall will be level 0. We must then specify which level the wall is going to be constrained to. So at the moment, we only have level 0 as our base constraint, and level 1 is our next level up. So to get a good view of what I'm about to do, I'm going to open up an elevation view. In the project browser, we have our elevations heading. If we click on the expansion button there, we have our east elevation. So if we double click on that, that opens up our east elevation. Here we have our level 0, which we see in our floor plans, and our level 1, again, it's in our floor plans in the project browser. So if we go back to our level 0, I would like to have both of those views open at the same time. So in order to do that, I'm going to type in WT, which stands for window tile. And by doing that, it's going to open up both views on the screen. So type in WT. Here on the left-hand side, we have our floor plan level 0. And on the right-hand side, we have our east elevation. So making sure that our level 0 is active by simply clicking on the tile. We'll now go back to the wall tool. I'm going to be using my draw by line from the draw panel, and now getting onto the options bar. So the first option here, it says height. It may say depth on yours, but if I hit the drop down arrow, we can go between the two. So whether we draw by height or by depth simply means that as we're drawing currently on level 0, so there's our level 0. If I have height selected, my base level will be constrained to level 0. So my wall will go above level 0 and connect to level 1. If I change over to depth, my wall will be constrained at level 0 and go below my level 0. So that's the difference between the height and the depth. Next, once we've specified that, we're going to use height. We'll then select the next option, which is where we want to constrain it to. So we're currently on level 0. So our next level is level 1. So if we constrain it to level 1 and draw our wall, there you'll see on the right-hand side in our east elevation, our wall's base constraint is level 0 and its top constraint is level 1. When we constrain this wall, if I go to my east elevation and select my level, and if I change the level, the wall, because it's been constrained to that level, it will move with the level. If I select unconnected, I'm then able to specify a height. So if I give this a height of 4,000, draw my wall, you'll notice then on the east elevation that there's my wall, base constraint level 0, unconnected with a height of 4,000. So if I change my first floor level, because the wall is not constrained to that level, the height doesn't change. So now we just want to have our level 0 open. So we double tap on the top of the window tile, will bring us back into our level 0. For the next option, which is the location line, I'm going to change my detail level to medium. So come down here to the view controls and select medium. So our next option is the location line. If we hit the drop down arrow, you can see we have 6 different options. With the first, which is the wall center line, I'm going to zoom in using my scroll wheel. When I click to start and move my cursor in the direction I want to draw my wall, you'll notice in the center there's a dashed light blue line. That is my location line. And as it's set to wall center line, you'll notice it's the center point of that wall. It's also represented by the blue grips either side. So if I change it to finish face exterior, when I draw my wall, the dashed blue line is on the outer face of my wall, again represented by the blue grips either side. As well, we have finish face interior. So there's our dashed blue line on the inner face, so it's running along the plasterboard of the wall. Again, blue grips either side. The other options which we have are core center line, core face exterior, and core face interior. What they're referring to as the core is when we create a wall, we must specify what the core of that wall is. The core is generally the structural part of your component. So the blockwork here would be the core of our wall. To show you how that's represented, I'm going to select it. I'm going to go to Edit Type and edit the structure and show a preview. Don't worry about what I've just done. We will go into a lot more detail about this in a later video. But for now, I'm just going to show you this as a small preview so you have a better understanding about what a core boundary is. So here's a section view of the wall which has been created. There's our brickwork, which is represented here. Next is the insulation. There's our concrete block and our plasterboard finish. And you'll notice on the either side of our concrete block, we have our core boundaries. So this here is our exterior core boundary, this blue line here. And here's our internal core boundary, which is this blue line here. So the purpose of creating the core boundaries, which is when we have 2 intersecting walls, you notice that the blockwork joins together, ignoring the brickwork. So the blockwork will cut right through the brick as well as the insulation. So all components have been created in this manner. So when we go to draw a wall and we change our location line to the core center line, when I place my wall, you'll notice that the dashed blue line is in the center point of that blockwork. So it's in between those 2 core points. I'm going to have core face exterior again. When I draw the wall, you notice my location line is on the external face of the blockwork. And we have the internal face of the blockwork. Our next option is chain. When we draw by line, having the chain feature turned on. When we click our start point and then our finish point, we'll automatically start a new line segment. So this is known as a chain. If I turn chain off, when I draw a line segment, that is a singular line segment and it will not continue as a chain. Next option is the offset. I'm going to change my location line to finish face interior. So when I draw my wall, that dashed line is on the face of the plasterboard. When I attach an offset, so we'll change my offset to 1000, Then when I draw my wall, you'll notice that there's my dashed blue line, which would be on the face of the plasterboard, and my wall is now offset up by 1,000. If the wall is in the incorrect location and you want to flip it to the other side of the location line, press the space bar to flip the wall to the other side of the location line. Next is the radius. So when it's turned on, we have a radius specified. When we draw two intersecting walls, it will generate a radius between those two intersecting walls. And lastly is join status. So when we draw two intersecting walls, they'll automatically join and the core boundaries will meet. If we have join status on disallow, when we do the same, the walls do not join, so the core boundaries do not meet. If you wanted the walls to join, simply select the wall and you'll notice this symbol here. That symbol is your join symbol. So once you click on that, the walls will then join together.